There is something profoundly unsettling about the way we eat today. Currently, over 98 million Americans are pre-diabetic, which translates to 1 in 3 adults walking around with blood sugar levels high enough to inflict damage on their organs, nerves, and blood vessels. Additionally, another 37 million individuals have developed full-blown type 2 diabetes. These numbers are increasing every year, yet doctors often treat this epidemic as if it were inevitable, as if it's simply a part of aging. But here's what nobody discusses. For over 1,000 years, medieval peasants consumed 3 meals a day, sometimes more, and type 2 diabetes was virtually unheard of. These individuals, who engaged in brutal physical labor and lived under harsh conditions, had no access to modern medicine. Yet their blood sugar levels remained stable, their weights were healthy, and they lived free from the chronic diseases that plague us today. What did they know that we have completely forgotten? Subscribe and comment for more videos. The answer isn't what you might think. It's not about eating less. Medieval peasants consumed plenty of food. Instead, it revolves around what they ate, when they ate it, and how their bodies processed it. Understanding these differences reveals why modern food often resembles a slow-acting poison that our bodies were never designed to handle. In 1986, a remarkable study was conducted by a team of researchers from Cambridge University. They analyzed over 800 skeletons from medieval grave sites across England, dating from 1100 to 1500 AD. Their aim was to find signs of metabolic diseases, bone deformities caused by diabetes, tooth decay patterns, and markers of chronic inflammation. What they discovered was astonishing. Out of 800 individuals, not a single case of diabetes was found. They encountered instances of malnutrition, injuries, and infections, yet no evidence of diabetes, no insulin resistance, and no metabolic syndrome. These individuals were ordinary people, farmers, laborers, and craftsmen. They weren't wealthy and didn't have access to elite diets or special foods. Instead, they consumed what grew locally and what they could afford, following the dietary traditions passed down through generations. Their bodies functioned as they were meant to. Now, let's compare this to the present day. If you were to enter a room filled with 800 Americans over the age of 45, approximately 300 of them would be pre-diabetic or diabetic. This represents a biological catastrophe, and it didn't occur by accident. Before we dive deeper, consider this. Have you or someone close to you been diagnosed as pre-diabetic or diabetic? What explanations did your doctor provide? Your experiences matter, as what you're about to learn will challenge everything you've been told about blood sugar and diet. One of the first major contrasts lies in the type of grains consumed by medieval individuals. Bread was a staple of the medieval diet, and a peasant could eat a pound or more of bread daily. This might sound like an excessive amount of carbohydrates, and indeed it is. However, here's the key. The grain they consumed was fundamentally different from what we eat today. Medieval wheat was an ancient variety known as einkorn or emmer. These grains possess a different genetic structure compared to modern wheat. Einkorn has 14 chromosomes, while modern wheat boasts 42. This distinction holds great significance. Over the past 60 years, modern wheat has been selectively bred to achieve higher gluten content, faster rising times, shorter stalks to resist wind, and increased yields per acre. However, these changes have also altered its digestibility. Modern wheat breaks down into glucose at an alarming rate. When you consume a slice of modern white bread, your blood sugar spikes higher and faster than if you consumed pure table sugar. This isn't an exaggeration. Studies have shown that white bread can score higher on the glycemic index than a candy bar. In contrast, einkorn and emmer break down slowly. The starches in these ancient grains are bound within a tighter matrix, requiring your digestive enzymes to work harder to access the glucose. As a result, sugar is released gradually over hours instead of all at once. This means no rapid blood sugar spikes, no insulin surges, and no crashes an hour later that leave you feeling hungry again. Medieval peasants could consume large amounts of bread and remain satiated for hours because their energy was released steadily. Their pancreases didn't have to dump massive amounts of insulin to manage a glucose flood. Over a lifetime, this difference in grain consumption is monumental. Constant insulin spikes exhaust your pancreas, damage your cells, and eventually lead to insulin resistance, which is the precursor to diabetes. A steady, slow release of glucose keeps your system balanced and healthy. Unfortunately, we have sacrificed that balance for the sake of convenience and yield. Modern wheat grows faster and cheaper, but it is wreaking havoc on our metabolic health. Next, consider the way grains were processed. Medieval bread was made from whole grain flour that was stone ground, often containing bits of bran and germ. Nothing was removed. The entire kernel was consumed. This meant that medieval bread was rich in fiber, lots of fiber. Fiber slows digestion, forming a gel in your stomach and intestines that delays glucose absorption. It also nourishes your gut bacteria, which produce short-chain fatty acids that enhance insulin sensitivity. Medieval bread contained 8 to 12 grams of fiber per serving, while modern white bread contains less than 1 gram. Even whole wheat bread today is made from flour that has been milled so finely that it behaves almost like white flour. The bran is pulverized into dust, failing to slow digestion in the way that coarse intact fiber does. The result is that modern bread, even the brown varieties that appear healthy, enters your bloodstream almost as quickly as refined sugar. Moreover, medieval peasants consumed bread that had been fermented, not the quick-rise yeast we use today, but sourdough starters, wild yeast, and bacteria that fermented the dough for 12 to 24 hours before baking. This fermentation achieved two important outcomes. First, it broke down some of the starches, making the bread easier to digest. Second, it lowered the glycemic index. Studies conducted in the early 2000s compared sourdough to standard bread and found that sourdough caused a 25% lower blood sugar spike. Medieval bakers may not have understood the science behind this, but they knew from experience that slow fermented bread tasted better, lasted longer, and kept them feeling full. They were inadvertently optimizing their food for metabolic health. Now, let's discuss what medieval peasants didn't eat. Sugar. Sugar was scarce, with honey being the only concentrated sweetener, and it was expensive. A peasant family might possess a small pot of honey that lasted for months, used sparingly on special occasions. Most of their food was not sweet. Vegetables, grains, meat, fish, and dairy were all naturally unsweetened. In stark contrast, the average American consumes 77 grams of added sugar daily, equivalent to 19 teaspoons every single day. This sugar is concealed in bread, sauces, soups, salad dressings, yogurt, cereals, and drinks. Many people are unaware they are consuming sugar in foods they don't even consider sweet, and their bodies struggle to handle it. Humans did not evolve to process 77 grams of pure sugar each day. When you consume that much sugar, your liver becomes overwhelmed, converting the excess into fat and storing it in your liver and around your organs. This condition, known as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, has reached epidemic proportions in the United States. Fatty liver leads directly to insulin resistance and diabetes. Medieval peasants didn't encounter this problem because they weren't inundating their livers with fructose every single day. Let's turn our attention to beverages. Medieval peasants primarily drank water and small beer, a very weak fermented barley drink with less than 2% alcohol, and occasionally milk. That was it. There were no sodas, fruit juices, energy drinks, or flavored lattes. When you drink sugar, it enters your bloodstream more rapidly than when you eat it, because there's no fiber, fat, or protein to slow its absorption. For example, a can of soda delivers 39 grams of sugar directly into your system within minutes. Your pancreas panics and floods your bloodstream with insulin. This cycle happens multiple times a day for millions of people, constituting a metabolic assault. In contrast, medieval peasants consumed beverages that had zero or near zero sugar. Their blood sugar levels remained stable throughout the day, every day, for their entire lives. Next, let's discuss meal timing and frequency. Medieval peasants typically ate 2 to 3 meals a day. Breakfast, if they had it, was simple, usually bread, perhaps with some cheese or leftovers. The main meal occurred at midday after several hours of hard work and was referred to as dinner, which was the largest meal of the day. They would then have a lighter supper in the evening. Between meals, they consumed nothing. No snacks, no grazing, and no constant eating. This eating pattern afforded their bodies long breaks between meals, allowing insulin levels to drop, fat to be burned, and cells to rest and repair. In contrast, modern eating habits are the opposite. We eat breakfast, followed by a snack, then lunch, another snack, dinner, dessert, and maybe even a late-night snack. This constant eating means we're consuming food from the moment we wake up until we go to bed, keeping insulin levels elevated without giving our bodies a chance to reset. This constant eating, regardless of the food's healthfulness, maintains high insulin levels and drives insulin resistance. Medieval eating patterns naturally supported metabolic health, as they didn't snack frequently due to the labor involved in preparing food. They ate when the meal was ready, and the accidental fasting between meals was one of the most powerful things they did for their health. Let's now consider vegetables. Medieval peasants consumed a variety of them: cabbage, onions, leeks, turnips, peas, beans, kale, and carrots. These vegetables were often boiled, baked, or made into thick stews. They were inexpensive, filling, and helped stretch more costly ingredients like meat. A typical peasant meal consisted of a large bowl of pottage, a thick stew made from vegetables, grains, and a small amount of meat or fat for flavor, served alongside coarse bread. These vegetables provided fiber, vitamins, and minerals, but more importantly, they added bulk without excessive calories. You could feel full without overwhelming your system with glucose. In contrast, modern diets often comprise high calorie density and low fiber. A fast food meal can deliver 1,200 calories in just a few bites, leaving you hungry an hour later because there's no fiber, no bulk, and nothing to signal to your brain that you're actually full. Medieval food had volume. A bowl of pottage was substantial. It took time to eat, and it kept you satisfied for hours. Because your stomach was genuinely full and your blood sugar remained stable, you weren't driven to snack. Now, let's address meat. Medieval peasants did eat meat, but not daily. Meat was costly. A chicken, pig, or cow represented significant wealth. Therefore, meat was consumed judiciously. A family might slaughter a pig in the fall and preserve the meat with salt, smoking, or curing. That pig would last for months, with small portions used to flavor stews rather than as the main component of every meal. In contrast, today, many people consume meat 2 or 3 times a day. Breakfast sausage, a deli sandwich for lunch, and a steak for dinner. The issue isn't meat itself, but rather the quantity and quality. Medieval meat came from animals that grazed on pasture, consumed grass, and moved around freely, resulting in a different fat composition, higher in omega-3 fatty acids and lower in inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids. Conversely, modern factory-farmed meat comes from animals fed grains, often corn and soy, kept in confined spaces, and given antibiotics. This meat's fat composition is heavily skewed toward omega-6, promoting inflammation, which is a significant driver of insulin resistance. Medieval peasants consumed small amounts of high-quality meat, while modern diets consist of large quantities of low-quality meat. Over decades, this difference compounds. Let's now discuss dairy. Medieval peasants consumed dairy, but it was raw, unpasteurized, and typically fermented. Products like cheese, buttermilk, and curds would spoil quickly, so they were transformed into more durable forms. Fermentation reduces lactose, the sugar in milk, and introduces beneficial bacteria. cheese contains almost no lactose. It's mainly fat and protein, neither of which spikes blood sugar. In contrast, modern dairy products are often pasteurized, homogenized, and typically low-fat. When the fat is removed, the lactose content increases, leading to more sugar. For instance, skim milk contains more sugar per serving than whole milk because the fat has been eliminated. Flavored yogurts are often loaded with added sugar, with a single serving of fruit-flavored yogurt containing up to 20 grams of sugar. Medieval peasants consumed full-fat fermented dairy with zero added sugar, while we often consume low-fat sweetened dairy products that spike blood sugar, another metabolic disaster disguised as health food. Now let's talk about legumes, beans, lentils, and peas. These were staples of the medieval diet, cheap, filling, and packed with protein and fiber. A bowl of lentil stew with bread constituted a complete meal. Legumes have a low glycemic index, releasing glucose slowly and steadily. They also contain resistant starch, a type of carbohydrate that your body cannot fully digest. Resistant starch nourishes your gut bacteria and improves insulin sensitivity. Medieval peasants consumed legumes almost daily, while modern Americans eat them infrequently. We've replaced beans with pasta, rice, and bread made from refined grains. Even when we do eat beans, they're often canned with added sugar and salt. The shift away from legumes is one of the most underappreciated dietary changes in the past century. Legumes are among the best foods for blood sugar control, yet they have nearly vanished from our diets. Physical activity plays a role in this discussion, but not in the way you might expect. Yes, medieval peasants worked hard, farming, hauling, building, and walking miles every day. However, the key isn't simply that they burned calories, it's that their muscles were constantly active. When muscles contract, they draw glucose out of your bloodstream without needing insulin, a process known as non-insulin-mediated glucose uptake. The more active your muscles are throughout the day, the better your body manages glucose. Medieval peasants didn't sit for 8 hours and then go to the gym for 30 minutes. They moved continuously throughout the day. In contrast, modern sedentary lifestyles mean that your muscles aren't pulling glucose from your blood. As a result, glucose lingers in your bloodstream, bathing your cells in sugar and forcing your pancreas to work overtime. While exercise is beneficial, it cannot fully compensate for hours of sitting. Constant movement, rather than intense but brief activity, is essential. Another factor that often goes overlooked is sleep. Medieval peasants went to bed when it got dark and awoke with the sun. There were no artificial lights, screens, or blue light disrupting melatonin production. Quality sleep is critical for blood sugar regulation. Poor sleep can lead to insulin resistance in just a few days, and one night of inadequate sleep can reduce your insulin sensitivity by up to 25%. Medieval peasants enjoyed deep restorative sleep each night, supported by their natural environment. In contrast, we are chronically sleep-deprived, glued to screens until midnight, consuming caffeine to stay awake, and then wondering why our blood sugar levels are out of control. Sleep deprivation is a major yet frequently overlooked driver of the diabetes epidemic. Let's also address stress. Life in medieval times was undoubtedly challenging, but it had a natural rhythm. Work during the day, rest at night, and seasonal cycles such as harvest, winter rest, and spring planting. There were no emails, 24-hour news cycles, and no financial markets crashing while you slept. Chronic psychological stress elevates cortisol levels, which in turn raises blood sugar and promotes insulin resistance. Modern life, however, is a constant source of low-grade stress. Financial pressures, work demands, information overload, and social comparisons on platforms like social media keep your body in a perpetual state of fight or flight. Elevated cortisol levels lead to persistently high blood sugar, gradually wearing down your system over the years. Finally, let's consider the food supply itself. Medieval food was local, sourced from within a few miles of one's home. It was seasonal, meaning individuals ate what was available at that time of year. And it was whole. Nothing was processed, refined, or chemically altered. In stark contrast, Modern food is industrialized, grown thousands of miles away, harvested unripe, transported in refrigerated trucks, sprayed with preservatives, and engineered for shelf life rather than nutrition. The nutrient density of modern food has plummeted. A contemporary tomato contains only a fraction of the vitamins and minerals it had 50 years ago, largely due to depleted soil and varieties bred for appearance and durability rather than nutrition. Medieval food was nutrient-dense because the soil was healthy, the plants were grown slowly, and nothing was bred for convenience. When your food lacks essential nutrients, your body remains hungry. You may eat more in an attempt to obtain the nutrients you need, but you only consume more empty calories. This cycle drives overeating and weight gain, ultimately leading to insulin resistance. The most disturbing aspect of this narrative is how the medical establishment treats diabetes as an inevitability. They advise patients to manage the condition rather than reverse it, prescribing medications that artificially lower blood sugar without addressing the underlying issues. They rarely mention the dietary habits of medieval peasants or how they lived. Why? The solution isn't profitable. You can't patent vegetables, whole grains, and daily walks, but you can patent drugs. Consequently, the system promotes medications while suggesting that diabetes is genetic, a result of aging, or merely bad luck. It's none of those things. It's about food and lifestyle. Both can be changed. If you want to eat like a medieval peasant, here's what you should do. 1. Choose whole grains. Opt for real, minimally processed grains. If you can find einkorn or emmer flour, use it. If not, purchase the coarsest whole grain flour available and make sourdough. Allow it to ferment for 24 hours. 2. Eliminate added sugar. Cut out all added sugars. No sodas, no sweetened foods, and no hidden sugars and sauces. If it tastes sweet and isn't fruit, don't consume it. 3. Emphasize vegetables. Make vegetables a central part of every meal. Aim to fill half your plate with them. 4. Incorporate legumes. Consume beans, lentils, and chickpeas daily. They're cheap, filling, and packed with nutrition. 5. Limit meat consumption. Eat meat sparingly, only a few times a week, rather than as the main component of every meal. When possible, choose pasture-raised options. 6. Opt for full-fat dairy. Prefer raw, full-fat, fermented dairy products like cheese and plain yogurt. Avoid low-fat varieties that often contain added sugars. 7. Avoid snacking. Limit your meals to 2 or 3 per day, without snacks in between. 8. Stay active. Incorporate constant movement into your daily routine. Walk, work with your hands, and engage in activities that keep you active throughout the day. 9. Prioritize sleep. Ensure you sleep when it's dark. Turn off screens and create a conducive sleep environment. 10. Manage stress. Disconnect from the relentless news cycle. Spend time in nature and foster community connections. These aren't extreme measures. They reflect how humans lived for millennia, and this lifestyle worked. The science supports this perspective. Studies on traditional diets, such as the Mediterranean and Okinawan diets, show consistent results. When people consume whole, unprocessed foods and lead active lives, diabetes is virtually non-existent. However, when these populations adopt a Western industrial diet, the rates of diabetes skyrocket within a generation. This pattern has been observed in every community examined. For example, the Japanese had minimal diabetes prevalence until they began consuming Western-style foods. The Pima Indians in Arizona experienced no diabetes while maintaining their traditional diet until they transitioned to flour, sugar, and processed foods. Now, over 50% are diabetic. If you find value in this information, please hit that like button and subscribe. We're revealing the truths that the food industry and medical system often ignore. The medieval peasant, sitting at his table with bread, vegetables, stew, and water, wasn't suffering. He was healthy. His body functioned as it was designed to. He didn't count calories, track macros, or rely on medications. He simply consumed real food, worked hard, and lived. This isn't primitive, it's wisdom. We traded that wisdom for convenience, and it's jeopardizing our health. Every piece of metabolic research points to the same conclusion. Whole foods, steady blood sugar, consistent movement, adequate sleep, and low stress are the keys to good health. Medieval peasants lived this truth without understanding it. Now that we know why, the real question is, will you embrace this knowledge and begin to change your life?